everybody. Good evening, good evening. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, it's a real delight for me to be here with you and the Jewish Labor Committee on this occasion of the annual Human Rights Awards dinner. I was delighted when Stu asked me if I could come. Of course, I've learned over these 30 years of knowing him that when Stu Applebaum asks you to do something, just get to yes. You're going to get there eventually. It's impossible to say no. He literally called me from the middle of his honeymoon. So I said yes, and I said, it's your wedding present, so here I am. And it is a real treat for me to be with so many friends in the labor movement, men and women with whom I had the great joy and pleasure of working. And I want to congratulate all of this year's Human Rights Award recipients. It is imperative that we recognize that just as we've honored human rights in the past, tomorrow is the anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration, the Declaration of Human Rights passed by the United Nations, largely because of the efforts of another great New Yorker, Eleanor Roosevelt, that we will never, ever back away from human rights. So I'm here to just say thank you, to say thank you for the work you have done and are doing and will do. And as the awards are given out tonight to these very worthy honorees, it should be not just a moment to thank them, but also to be challenged about what more we need to do. I happen to believe that the labor movement is even more relevant today than it was just a few years ago. Unions don't just fight for your members, you fight for all working families, and nobody knows better than unions how to stand up to a bully. And we've got a bunch of them around these days, and so therefore we need all of you to be even more determined to fight for the rights and the opportunities of working families. It's especially important that we stand up for the most vulnerable among us, the children, the elderly, people with disabilities, the immigrants, the oppressed, everyone who needs a voice, who doesn't have one on his or her own. We've never seen such cruelty and contempt for the values that we pledge allegiance to, that we see embodied in our Constitution, that we have fought to make a more perfect union over all of these years together. And the current administration, I don't need to tell you, has been conducting a concerted attack on the rule of law, on the importance of our government and the services that it provides for people. They've attacked journalists and the freedom of the press. In effect, they're waging a war on democracy. And by doing so, they're creating so much distraction, diversion, and confusion that a lot of Americans are trying to figure out what's going on. And that's where all of you come in. You've got to remind people that this administration has tried to rip away health care for millions, to end coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, to take food stamps away from people who have no other opportunity to make sure they and their families are going to be able to survive. They've given tax cuts to the wealthiest few, and they've paid for them on the backs of working families and children. They've gutted funding for public schools and universities and would like to do even more if we let them get away with it. They've ripped families apart. You know, I happen to believe you need a secure border, and a humane immigration system. And I don't think those two are in contradiction. That's what we should be working toward. And there's no excuse for the mistreatment of children that we've seen being done in our names. You know, children have been dying in custody. And children have been taken away from their families, about 50,000 of them now. And some will never be reunited. Now, there's a decent way to run an immigration system, and then there's the Trump way. And we need to get back to running a decent immigration system that provides safe conditions for people. You know that we've seen the gutting of protections for workers, just totally open season on organizing. Your jobs have gotten tougher, but so have you. You know, this organization has rallied to help save affordable health care. You've spoken out on behalf of dreamers and immigrants and refugees. You've marched in the fight for a $15 minimum wage. You have stood up for the right to bargain collectively. And despite the Supreme Court decision in Janus, unions aren't going anywhere. And along the way, you have fought for civil rights and women's rights and human rights and so much more. You know, as Stu likes to remind us, the Jewish Labor Committee has always been on the front lines in the struggle for justice. Back in August of 1963, more than 200,000 Americans gathered at the Lincoln Memorial for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Many Jewish organizations took part in that march, but none brought more people than the Jewish Labor Committee. And really, at the heart of it all is the concept of tikkun olam, which says that repairing the world is the responsibility of each and every one of us. Or as I learned growing up in the Methodist Church, do all the good you can for all the people you can, in all the ways you can, as long as ever you can. There's that thread running through all of the great religions, and particularly the Judeo-Christian tradition of caring for the vulnerable, the stranger, the foreigner, standing up for justice and equity and freedom and fairness. You know, one of my favorite books is called The Return of the Prodigal Son, which was written by a Dutch priest named Henry Nouwen. And he talks about practicing the discipline of gratitude. In other words, it's up to us to make the choice to be grateful even when things aren't going well. And it's not enough to be grateful for the good things. That's easy. We've got to be grateful for the hard things too, because they will make us stronger. That's the period we find ourselves in right now in our country. You know, it would be easy to walk away and say, I can't deal with this. You know, I can't tell fact from fiction. You know, I don't want to live in an alternative reality. I'm checking out. Well, that's what the other side wants us to do, my friends. They want us to just throw our hands up in despair and walk away saying somebody else is going to have to continue the fight. I can't do it any longer. Well, that's not what this organization was created for. It's not what it's done, and it's not what every union and every union member represented in this audience tonight believes. But people have to be given courage, and the way we get courage is by seeing it in others. My daughter and I just wrote a book called The Book of Gutsy Women, and in it, we look at the stories of women who overcame incredible obstacles, who persevered despite all of the struggles. Just to name two, Frances Perkins, you know, one of the great American women, another New Yorker, who pioneered so many of the labor changes when she was director of labor in New York State, when Franklin Roosevelt was governor, then went on to be the first woman in any cabinet when she served FDR as the Secretary of Labor, fighting for unions, fighting for fair and safe working conditions, taking on all kinds of powerful forces. Another is Dolores Huerta, who along with Cesar Chavez created the Farm Workers Union. And she was on the front lines of bargaining collectively so that farm workers had decent working conditions, sanitation in the fields, a possible path toward both citizenship and a better future for their own children. And boy, did she face some tough fights. She was in the front of demonstrations and protests. She was in a demonstration in San Francisco in the 1970s when she got beaten up by a police officer, severely injured, had to bring a lawsuit, was able to not only recover compensation because of the way she'd been treated, because she was in a nonviolent civil disobedience protest, but she also was able to change some of the behaviors of the police force in San Francisco. These are just two of the women that inspire me. You know, when I get a little down, and it happens from time to time, not too often, but occasionally, you know, I like to think about people in the past and the present who have just gotten up and said, I'm not going back. I'm going to go forward, and I'm going to make a positive difference, not just in my life, but in the lives of so many others. So we all need to be, women and men alike, gutsy in this time, because it's not going to be easy, I'll tell you. We're going to have a tough election in 2020. It shouldn't be. Anybody with eyes to see and ears to hear should already be convinced, right? But it's going to be a tough election, and you need to bring your organizing skills, your shared sense of values, your feeling of empathy and compassion and caring, your deep conviction about justice, because we're going to need every single person in this fight. So enjoy this holiday season, and then come the new year, let's get to work and make sure that we get our country back. Thank you all very much.
We can't let Secretary Clinton leave empty-handed. We want you to remember this evening, and we're going to be giving you a poster entitled The Fabric of Our Lives, which was produced by the United Hebrew Trades of the Jewish Labor Committee. The poster highlights the Jewish immigrant experience in America, particularly in New York's garment factories. The brick wall in the lower right corner represents the ghettos, pogroms, and poverty confronting the Jews in Europe at the turn of the century. The open gate above the wall symbolizes hopes for liberation, justice, and a new beginning in America. And we must keep these hopes alive for new generations of American immigrants.
Oh, thank you.
Secretary, thank you.
So great.
We'll send this to you. And now we're going to have dinner.